start there with Matt Patricia, and I was talking on the Buckeye Huddle Primetime last night about Matt Patricia when the hire was made, the nastiness that was said about him, bringing up allegations from when he was 19 years old that were dismissed, the stuff about Detroit and what a monster he was. I mean, everybody is kind of glossing over this. It was a really rocky start, a very widely criticized hire, and there's honestly no way he could have acquitted Ryan Day better for that decision than what we just saw. That was a virtuoso performance.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people were talking about this yesterday, today, just in the aftermath of the game, but he schooled Steve Sarkisian, one of the best offensive minds in college football. And I know if you ask Matt Patricia candidly, he better school Steve Sarkisian, because that's an NFL mind who's done it at the highest level of NFL football, and won Super Bowls that way. He better school him. But just in general, if you're talking about where Matt Patricia's at now, he just schooled one of the best offensive minds in college football, big time. And Matt was asked about this after the game, about some of the things that were said about him, and I understand that, and he downplayed it well. But at the end of the day, one of the things he said was a lot of those things that were being said about him were coming from people outside of the Ohio State fan base, and I'm sure there were still Buckeye fans who didn't like the hire or had something to say about this, but a lot of it was from Lions fans, who watched him fail as a head coach. And I made this comment on Twitter as well right after, in the aftermath, that good news about Matt Patricia coming to Ohio State and being the defense coordinator is he doesn't have to be a head coach. He's not a head coach in the NFL. He's coming to be the defense coordinator at Ohio State. It was always stupid to come, to hold him to that standard of what he was as a head coach in Detroit. And so we saw him now with an NFL mind, with NFL players who are still playing on the college stage. What that marriage is like, and man, was it really impressive. And if anybody still wants to pick apart, oh, it might have been this or that, just listen to Steve Sarkisian's comments after the game about the credit he gave the Ohio State defense and Matt Patricia for the way they were able to disguise things, and just truly confuse, a young quarterback in Arch, which, that's the goal. A lot of the talk coming into this is, was how, how these two quarterbacks would fare, and how they would approach them and confuse these guys and things like that. They just absolutely just baffled Arch on a lot of occasions. But it wasn't just Arch; it was, again, Steve Sarkisian, who I think everybody who's paying attention to college football has a ton of respect for, and in his ability to coach football. So, what else would you want from it? I'm not surprised by it. I was never a guy who ever questioned for a second that this would be something that would be very advantageous for Ohio State. I thought as Ohio State could do, I thought it was as good as they could do for the hire, given the circumstances, the way Jim Knowles left, and it was just validated and all that. And his mind with those players. I always wonder why people doubted that it would work, or that they hated the hire, other than they just thought he was a piece of shit human being. Which I didn't know Matt Patricia before then, so but whatever. But just in terms of coaching football, I was confident that he wasn't just going to come in here and just be a piece of shit and, just not work from in that case right from the start. And if that wasn't the case, then X's and O's wise with those players, it was going to be fine. And well, we're one game into it, but if you were a Matt Patricia naysayer, you sure look like a dumbass today.
So there was a lot. It felt like a lot about his personal life, which I think to be the personal stuff that the Detroit players were saying. But I feel like it was so funny when he got to Ohio State and you got the players talking about him, giving him hugs, and it's oh wow, you must feel silly now. But when we talk about Jim Knowles and Jim Knowles' defense, it was consistently what we heard from him for years was, I've got better players and I've got to get accustomed to not trying to schematically do so much. I can do less now because I've got these better players. And he took it that way, kind of dumbed things down for himself. And that was the way he elected to go about it. Obviously, it's more complicated to do a lot more different stuff.
Right.
And Matt Patricia just, obviously worked his butt off with these guys. And I felt like this was going to be a very different looking defense because of that buy-in on the relationship side. I thought that they would be, okay, go ahead, introduce a little more to the guys, see how they take it, introduce a little more, and that we would end up seeing a different looking defense about midway through the season. Didn't expect it for game one. That is a ton of trust to put in those guys to execute all that different stuff.
Well, without question, I think what you just said there is like really important, because for everything we, all the credit we want to give Matt Patricia, the fact that those players on the field were able to handle this from it says so much about from the guys on the field, and that shouldn't be overlooked. Is like, yes, obviously Matt Patricia is a wonderful defensive mind. Like, I don't think anybody question that, whether you like the person or not. I think everybody understands, like, the guy knows a ton of football. So that there's that element. But for Ohio State to be able to handle what he was doing and that much of what he was doing right away, and be able to throw that on the field in week one against an excellent opponent, it's just really, really amazing. And I also want to say just one thing, because I've seen this a lot on Twitter. A lot of people are taking this opportunity to dunk on Jim Knowles. And look, I don't love the way Jim Knowles left Ohio State either, but like, Jim Knowles did well for himself and did well for Ohio State in his time there. I know it took a little bit to ramp up to it, but at the end of the day, that defense is, a large reason why they won a national championship last year. And so, I don't love the dunking on Jim Knowles. I don't love the way he left. When Penn State comes to Columbus in November, I'm not going to feel too bad about a lot of things that are said about Jim Knowles and lead up, and certainly maybe even in that stadium on that day. But don't love the dunking on Jim Knowles today, because I think he still did a really good job and did what he was brought to Ohio State to do, obviously last year. But at the end of the day, Ohio State fell into a really good situation, and once again, it's a lot of that's because the players they have, that they were able to do that much this early.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I didn't do any dunking on Jim Knowles, though I do think this makes that matchup so much more exciting.
Sure.
In the fact of the question, could it be possible, and we kind of posed it, a couple of weeks ago, that Brian Day might have actually upgraded in this whole deal. And it sounded a little silly to say that. But, when you look at the NFL, with the talent being so much closer from team 1 to team 32, these guys got to get an edge schematically. Like, that's what they are focused on nonstop. And you listen to Knowles in his own words. Like, I got the talent advantage almost every time on the field. I can dumb it down. Well, if you can get your guys to execute it, and you got the mind to be able to do it, the things we saw out of the defense were so different. I mean, from Caden Curry at nose tackle, and Atkinson and Kenyatta on the edge, and Arvell spying, and then, the bear fronts with Arvell or Sonny on the edge. We had Caleb at the edge. We had Lorenzo was on the edge. You had McLean on the edge and then dropping back into coverage in the post. And that's not to say anything about the coverages, which were ever rotating after the snap. Like, that was just, I couldn't believe they pulled that all off. With all these, like, if you take a lot of risk doing that, you screw up doing that, like, you can get picked apart.
Yeah.